Are designed to really coordinate with the existing palette, bring in some new tones to this. So what we're doing different, obviously, is we're releasing these colors in 6 different products throughout the year. So when you have it, you'll be able to get it in the ink pad, and the reinker, and the spray, and the paint, and the marker all at one time. But what's also very interesting to kind of understand is how these colors work together. Meaning, if I take a spray, for example, I'll just show you some cracked pistachio on that surface. If you take a pink, right, so we take pick raspberry, you'll see that you get a nice purple blend with it. If I had cracked pistachio and maybe I took a little bit of peacock feathers because maybe you like turquoise or teal, it creates a totally different blend, not as dark as peacock feathers, it actually lightens it up from the green. So it's really important that throughout this whole release, every month, I'll have all these different recipes to share of, you know, mixing the new color with some of the existing colors, because they really do complement each other. I developed this palette over a year and a half. I wanted to make sure that the colors that I chose really work with this, because, I mean, obviously having 48 colors in the palette, it's a beautiful palette. You think, oh, we don't need any other colors, we have it. Until you see a color and you think, oh wow, where's that been? Yeah, I need that color because it doesn't look like anything else. And a lot of people have asked when they saw cracked pistachio for the first time at CHA, everyone was asking, oh, is it like this? Or does it look like this? Is it like this? And I'm like, no, it's not like anything. So you take that and you just try to compare it to, its closest would be like evergreen bough, and even evergreen is still going to be much bluer. Or if you try to even dial it back to say, okay, it's going to be more like bundled sage. No, bundled sage is still going to be very green. So they're all very different from each other, and I think that that's really important to know. So let me just do some backgrounds. We'll work with cracked pistachio, and then I'll do some embossing as well. So here I've got some tags. We'll do a couple of different ones. So these have some texture paste on them already. And texture paste is a Ranger product. It's an embossing paste. It's a very lightweight embossing paste. You just apply it with a palette knife. So when you use it, it's a very creamy paste, very thick. But what's nice about this is that I can color it ahead of time if I wanted to. So if I wanted to make this a color, I can tint it with any colorant. I can tint it with paint, or stain, or markers, or reinkers, anything you want. And you could just mix it up and apply it through a stencil. What I prefer though is to apply it to a surface, let it dry, and when it dries it's going to stay completely flexible, but it is inkable. It will take ink. And I think that's a really great feature of this product over something else. I'll just apply it through a stencil really quick so I can also show you embossing with it. So here I'll take this. I'll use the same stencil. It's kind of a mess. I haven't cleaned my stencils at all this time. It's okay.
They look well used.
They are well used, but you should always clean your stencil when you have paste.
Because the ink will come off again.
But now I have to use alcohol. I have to use rubbing alcohol to take it off. So if I use ink, all the ink will come off just with water. But if you ever let the texture paste or the paint dry in a stencil, then you have to use alcohol to clean it off. But it will come clean.
It's the most boring part.
It is. So like at CHA when I was demoing the stencils, I would just have a container of water. So when I was done, I would just put it in the water, and then it actually floats right off. If you put your stencils in water, the paste will literally float right off of the stencil. But for this, it's fine. So what I'm doing is I'm using the knife to press the paste into the stencil, and then I'm using the edge of the knife to lift it off the stencil. And the reason you want to do that is because the thickness of the stencil is actually thick enough to give us a nice texture, but if I put this on too high, when I go and lift this off, it's going to create a little wall and it will fall over. So that's why I just like to spread that on, get a little texture, and scrape off the excess. Alright? So that's our paste on there. This, I'm just going to wipe off the excess. It will be fine. It doesn't have to be that clean. Today's my last day of demoing anyway. It's alright.
I can keep it.
It's fine. It's be dirty, it doesn't matter. But what I like to show is how we can use this with embossing powders as well. So here I'm just going to take gold embossing powder, and I'm just going to put embossing powder over the top of that. And I'm just going to let this dry. So I'm just going to cover this. Just covering all those little areas. So the nice thing about the paste and then pouring the embossing powder is it's going to cover all of the elements of the paste. The top of it, the edge of it, all of that. And we'll put this back in. I prefer to let my paste dry now. So instead of heating it right away, because if you heat texture paste right away, it gets puffy, it starts to bubble. So I prefer to let it dry, and it's going to dry with my embossing powder on it, and then I will go back and heat emboss it. Okay, so we're just going to let this dry. Drying time, if you use the powder on there, is probably going to take about 10 to 15 minutes to dry, which is not very long. If it doesn't have embossing powder, it usually dries much quicker. Clean this up. So let's talk about the tags that actually have some paste already on there, it's already dry. We can color this with really any medium that we want, and I'm going to use stain on one, and I'll use some paints on another one. When I go and use stains, you can use the sprays or you can use the dabber. If you use the sprays, you're able to get color more concentrated in areas, whereas this, if I have to rub it over the top, it tends to want to pull this paste. Now the paste will work on fabric, it will work on wood, it will work on paper, chipboard, anything like that. And another habit that I like to get into whenever you're working with inks, any kind of sprays, if you just get in the habit of wiping off the sprayer when you're finished, then they'll never clog, because the inks,
I noticed you did.
They all contain resin. So dilutions, ink sprays, everything, it has a resin in the ink. And that resin, if you don't clean it, could eventually clog your sprayer.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that it will, but it's very, it's just a good habit to get into. Now every layer that you place over the top, so I just show you that's kind of my first ink layer. If I were to apply more ink to it, it's going to take another layer. Yeah. So that's one of the nice things about working with this product. I think I'll go a little bit deeper on that. I'm just going to dry this. And my paste will absorb the ink the same way the paper will. If I want to blend my colors, I can take a little bit of water. I can spray that over the top. And we're just going to try this out. Now you'll see that wherever the water hit, even on the paste, that paste is going to react the same way the paper will. It creates those little dots. And this, I'll just wipe this up. Normally at home I would take something, but here, no. So I love the effect that the paste gives, but it's still going to take more color. If I want to add more color, it will still take more color. So here I will take my blending tool, and I'm going to work with my ink pads. Now, the mini distress inks, these have been really popular, very convenient, because people can have all the colors, they can mix and match. We sell them in kits, sets of 4, but we also now sell them individual, so they can pick their colors. It's really nice. The storage tin, of course, if you're not familiar with it, has a track system on the bottom, so even if the tin is not full, you don't have to worry about your inks moving around. What I like to do with mine is every single ink pad that I have in there, I have given each one its own blending foam. So I just put a mini blending foam in the bottom, so now I can pick up that color and I can work with that. So this way I just need to have one handle, and then I can just take out the foam, it just sits right in the back. And then when I pick another color, it has its own foam.
Ja, dat is heel goed idee.
Now I'm going over with a little bit of rusty hinge. And you can apply your inks in different methods. You don't always have to blend. It just depends on how you want the color to go over the surface. So rusty hinge is going to give me a nice kind of rust layer over the top of that. Yeah, and having that foam under there, you'll use all of your colors a lot more because they're just ready to go. So we're just adding some salty ocean, making that a little bit more blue. And now when I go in with my water, and I'm just dripping it on there. So I'm just holding the neck of the bottle when I'm spraying, and that's just going to create drops. But it's going to give me that great background over my ink layers. And every time you add a layer of water, it's going to react. Yeah. It just makes the background, you don't have to do anything. It just makes it look cool.
If you would do it the other way around, color your background first and then use a texture paste, would it absorb the color?
No.
It wouldn't. Okay. Dat is dan een verschil met die andere, want die doet dat dus wel.
That would be nice, but I mean, it might, if it was distress, it might take a little color around the edges, but it wouldn't pull the color straight up from the top.
Ja, dat is met die Liquitex.
Ja,
die doet het.
Ja, die Liquitex doet het wel.
Ja.
Ja. Dat is fijn, dan weten wij wat natuurlijk. Want dat vind ik dus hinderlijk als je dat niet wilt.
So here I'm just going to take a marker and I'm just going to give it just some black. Yeah, just use the spritzer. Yeah. Makes for a cool background. A great background that you can use on a card, you can die cut, you can do whatever, but it's very nice when you work with the paste that it will take on the different colors or different mediums that you put over the top of it. This one will just give it a totally different look. So here we can take some distressed paint. If we want to take some distressed paint, we can apply that. Now the paint is also going to be reactive with water. That's one of the things that is really important in any of the distressed paints. It's the only product in the line that is permanent.
Yeah.
So this is a multi-surface product. Everything else, all of my inks, I need to work on something porous. Paper, wood, fabric, but it's not permanent. It will wash out. This, on the other hand, I can use metal, glass, plastic, wood, fabric, paper, and it is permanent when it's dry. Okay? So when I use it, I can use it straight out of the bottle, but also if I get it wet, it's going to react the same way the inks react. It wants to do something. So if you go and put it through as a background, so here we're just going to add that just to the top, and I'll dry this layer. Once this layer dries, this is going to be permanent, which means when I put my ink over the top of it, it's not going to mix with that color. So sometimes you want to use paint. It just depends on the effect that you get. And that's why I like to remind people, like, try using different mediums, because different mediums are going to give you a different reaction, different results at the end.
Well, we're only limited by our budgets.
That's right. I agree. I agree. We're limited by our creative budget. Like, what can we buy?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. What can we buy? What can we have? What do we need? Everything. I agree.
We like it all.
We need it all.
And we need it all, right?
We need it all.
Dat moeten we thuis zeggen. I need it all.
Ja. Apart van die
Awesome.
So here, just because I swiped that paste through, even though I got a little bit of color on my background, which I like, I also love the fact that the color really went onto the paste more than anything. And let's add a little bit of peacock feathers.
Goed, twee cijfers, maar dat boek. Oh ja.
Great colors. You want to stalk me? Stalk me.
So much time we have to work next to you.
Okay.
No, maybe take a photo with you.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Mach mal. Du mit deinen.
Ja, die strakjes.
That's good. Who's taking it?
Niet jouw pen.
Who's taking it?
Oh, dit is allemaal niks? Ja.
Every year the same. Okay. Ja. Ich kann sofort weiter. Wir müssen nur wieder rüber. Maybe
If I
you
have one.
pause it.
If I have one.
Thank you.
Yeah. So here you can just see that on that background, just adding that little bit of purple, that's going to stay on the top. If I was to do that layer in ink, when I add the yellow and the blue, that purple would then be brown. So that's why, right? So that's why it just depends on what you want. When people say, well, should I use paint or ink? I say, well, what do you want to use? You know, knowing that using that paint layer, that purple still looks like ink because the paint reacts like ink, but when it's finished, it really has a cool look. All right, that's a fun tag, isn't it? Because people look at it and they're like, wow, how is that done? You say, oh, it took so long. It took hours, right? Yeah, it's just like, I would show you, but it's like hours.
Hard work.
Yeah, so difficult. Okay. Next we'll do a background. I'll take some paint. So we're going to use a little cracked pistachio. I'm also going to go in with some ink, cracked pistachio ink spray. And I'll also use, there you go, a little peacock feather. So I just wanted to get some color down there. Still going to go and just add a little bit of water. This is just going to be the background on my tag.
Grappig kleurtje, hè?
No. So the painted area will be permanent, but by mixing it, most of the layer will be permanent. If it mixes with the paint, yes. If it stays separate, no. But I want it to blend, so as long as I do this while it's wet, it's going to react. And once it dries, most of this will be permanent. So yeah, you can mix your ink and paint a little bit to make it kind of permanent. Yeah.
Het is ook een leuk idee om mensen een paar tags te laten maken en dan met die techniek.
Nou ja, dat is, ja, precies.
Ja.
Dat is natuurlijk wat
Een ringetje er doorheen en dan dus de achterkant zetten.
That's, I mean, look at that background. It's just beautiful. It's an easy
it's
background.
quite a marble effect.
Ja, ja. Marble effect.
Yeah. Because you're mixing acrylic with a dye.
Ja.
They're poor cutting that underneath. I keep melting it. Pops up. Back.
Get down.
Yeah. You see it. Yeah. Okay. Next I will go in with some color. We'll take a stencil. Something open. Yes, it's 15 new stencils. I don't have all of them with me, but like Flourish, this is new. Brick, that's new. Brick Wall. Typo, that's new. Splotches is new because they're all kind of jaggedy circles. It's good. No. This is new. Crackle is new. Lace is new. It's kind of a big version of the doily. It's much larger. And this one is really great if you're going to use the paste, because you can take that on the canvas and do the paste and it looks like crackle paste.
Yeah. Oh.
But you don't need crackle paste.
Oh.
Right?
The doily stencil. Gloss paper with
Wat
Oh,
een
yeah.
idee.
It's nice, isn't it?
Ja, dat is een goed idee.
Yeah, it's a lot of
Weg met die chroma crackles.
Ja,
So that's why I did it. Because I was like, yeah. The same way like when you see this, then you won't need metallic paste. Because that will soon be metallic paste. You'll see. Alright, so let's take a design. And we'll just add a little bit to the tag.
Dit lijkt een beetje een nieuwe dye die met je hapjes eruit.
So for this one, what I'm using, I'm just going to take it and just create that blend. Okay? Just add a little layer onto that, and I'm going to go in with a little deeper color. We'll take Gathered Twigs. I'll just add some of this. Okay. Still go back a little bit of water because I just want to react that layer, and we'll dry it. So for this one I'm going to stamp, and we'll do a little bit of metallic on this, and I want to make sure that this layer is completely dry before I go and stamp and emboss. And I like to show the process because a lot of people love the look of kind of a layered background. How do you get that look? Well, you have to layer. You have to put something on, dry it, put something on, dry it. You have to layer those colors.
You should just make these into papercrafts.
Just done.
Consider it done.
Yes.
Just already have inked backgrounds?
Yeah.
That would be a fun paper collection, wouldn't it? Just already have these inky backgrounds that you just take, you're ready to go.
I like that because not everyone, some people are intimidated by all the,
I agree.
don't like to get ink on their fingers.
Right, or what colors go together, you know, what colors do I work
Just
with?
buy them in a 6x6.
There you go.
Ja, wie geen
That makes
inkt
it
aan
easy.
zijn vingers wil, die is fout.
And then they would have to buy all the inks afterwards.
Of course, they would want them to match their paper. Yeah. They would.
Now that's marketing strategy.
Yeah, right. All right,
That's
so
what I do.
like I have it, now I need it to match everything that I have. Yeah.
Then you can make wallpapers.
Yeah, well, fabric has been really good. We've done really well in the fabric market, taking the papers. So here I'm going to go in with some distress, and I'm going to ink up a stamp with some distress ink. I'm only going to need part of the stamp, so I'll only ink part of this. And we're going to use it as a background. So I'm going to stamp this, and I'm going to emboss it with sticky embossing powder. Sticky embossing powder is embossing powder that's sticky. Okay, it's
Obviously.
it's basically like think of it as a powdered glue. Okay, it's glue that's in a jar. So it's powder, and when it melts, it becomes sticky. And when it's sticky, you can stick things on it. So here I'm going to use foil. Right. So Ranger sells a whole variety of foils. This package happens to be my favorite. This is vintage. So vintage has all of those different vintage colors in it. It has, you know, different bronze and golds and cream and silver, and it's just it's a nice effect. So I'm going to take that, and I'm just going to take my stamp.
Nee, dat is omdat het dus
Stamp my
hij erover
image.
ademt, doet hij
I just
het
want to give it good pressure. I want to make sure I have a nice impression on there. Then I'm going to take sticky embossing powder, cover that, because distress ink is embossable. And so because I can emboss with distress ink, it was important on my last layer where I stenciled that I use my heat tool first, because if I didn't dry that blended layer and I put embossing powder, it would cover everything.
Everywhere.
Yes. So even though distress ink is dry to the touch very quickly, it does take a heat tool to make sure that the resin in that ink is dry for embossing. All right. So I think we'll use this for it. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to heat this up. Now we call this embossing powder, but it really isn't embossing powder. Embossing powder is plastic. This is not. This is just glue. So you'll see that when it goes to melt, it melts very quickly, because it's just a glue. And now it's sticky. So I'm going to take ugly side down.
How long will it stay sticky?
It will stay sticky for a couple of minutes, usually 2-3 minutes. So you have plenty of time.
Yeah, well, but you have to prepare your
Yeah, you want
materials
to have
on
something
it.
ready.
Yeah.
This, we can also use glitter, so we can cover the sticky embossing powder with glitter. I'll show you that. So what I do is I normally press this. I don't take anything flat. I don't want to burnish it because it's liquid, right? So if you did that, your image just becomes a mess. So you just want to just press it with your fingers and let it cool. And what I tell people is just take your fingers and rub over the foil, and when it goes to release like that, it will just come off. And then I like to go in with another color and just add accent to it. So you can see my image was transferred off of that. But this one, if there's still any areas still sticky, it will allow me to add a whole nother layer of foil.
Is there a way you could get the negative of this so that you have...
You would have to cover the whole thing with sticky then. Yeah. But it would be very cool. Yeah.
Then you can use glitter on the...
So that's our surface. So now your surface is completely foiled. Yeah. And I can take that same ink. Maybe I want to ink over some of that. Then maybe I want to add a little bit of accent to this. So now just using my blending tool, now that I have ink on that surface, same thing, right? So instead of using a stamp or a stencil, I'm just using the blending tool. And that's still going to make that powder stick. Right, now wherever I have this is going to be sticky. So if you don't want a perfect line, you can tap off some of that glue before you heat it. Because remember, it's just ink under there at this point. So I always tell people, if you see something and you don't want to add any of the glue, then take most of that off, which is what I'm going to do. They won't mind. Right? Because you just want it to be very random. Yeah. And then we'll go in and heat it. There you go. And now it will be sticky.
Ja, dat is
So this, just really great to use a stamp, a stencil, your blending tool, anything for that.
Moeten we ook hebben.
Ja,
We need it all.
alles moeten we hebben. Ja. Je bent er wel.
Yeah, they're really, great background.
Ja.
Cool look too, really nice. And then I normally like to use a powder tool, you know, something that you would put, it's like an anti-static, you ever use that? So I normally like to go over this with that because it's still going to be a little tacky for a while until it completely dries. So if you go over it with powder, then you lose it. So sometimes I'll take a mica powder, perfect pearl, something, and just dust it because I don't like that feeling that it has. Yeah. So something...
If you would put on it on purpose, would it stay?
Yes.
Add a nice effect.
Right, so if we wanted to use that same idea, but maybe instead of metallic you wanted to use a color. So if we took, let's take something colorful like a stamp. We'll use a bigger stamp.
Mooi, het is echt mooi hè? Wauw. Nee.
So this one, and I'll still go back and emboss that one, but I'll show you another thing for sticky embossing powder before we move away. So here I'm just going to take my stamp. I'm going to ink this up, and I'm just going to use different colors of distress, just using the ink pads.
Ja, dat is ook makkelijk met die kleintjes, weet je, kleinere stukjes.
And you can really apply the ink however you want. You can go light to dark, dark to light. It won't ever contaminate your ink pads.
The small ones are more convenient to ink your stamps
really
partially.
nice.
Yeah.
But you can use the markers as well.
Markers are not embossable. So yes, you can color this, but you would have to then just stamp it or watercolor. But I'm going to emboss with this. So that's a great question.
Yeah.
It is. Because if you were to color it and try to emboss, it's not going to happen. No. So this will allow me to go in, stamp my image, take my sticky embossing powder, pour it over the top. And now this time, because I have this image and it's colored, I'm going to go in and add glitter to it. All right? So, let me clear that off. You see that little powder there? All right? So I'm just going to heat this up. And you'll see when it melts, your image becomes really bright.
Oh ja.
And then we just
Wel
take
makkelijk zien
glitter.
wanneer het...
And I'm just using rock candy because it's completely clear. One of the things I love about this glitter is that it doesn't have any iridescence. So it doesn't go to gold or green or blue, it's just completely clear. I'll place that on, put this back. Put this back. And I'm just giving my glue just a chance to cool, to dry. And then we're just going to go over this and we're going to wipe off the excess. Another great thing is the glitter always falls, right? So most glitter, when you hit it, it goes all up in the air. This doesn't. This is a completely different type of glitter that just falls to the surface. So if you were working at home, you were working on your table, you can still tap off all the glitter, scoop it up and put it back in the jar if you wanted to.
Use your dog as well.
Yeah. Right, your dog.
My dog, he always glitter.
Just everywhere.
Glitter and
Just a sparkly dog, yeah.
everything.
Paint.
So here I'm just going to take, and at home I would take like a static cloth or paper towel, but now just my image is glittered. So it only sticks to your image. So it looks as if you went in with glossy accents and did all of that, but so, and if you didn't want your image to be colored, if you were going to use a color of glitter, then who cares what color ink you could use Versamark, you could use any embossing ink. So if you were just going to cover it with a colored glitter, you could use any ink for that because it's going to cover it up. But that's why I wanted to go in with those specific colors because I wanted to use clear. And this is still very nice because, you know, this image that's here, I would still get another card out of it. I would just spray it with water and stamp it.
I've used the rocket candy glitter on my nails too for a wedding.
I love it.
Nails.
Oh!
Yeah, make it sparkly.
Yeah.
So this one, what's really great about this new stamp set is called Watercolor. So the Watercolor has all of these butterflies and flowers and hearts, and they're designed specifically to have a watercolor effect. So unlike a regular butterfly stamp that has really solid lines, this has very blended lines, so it just looks more realistic. Yeah, the birds.
Nieuwe. Oh, je vogels!
They love
Crazy birds.
the birds. Yeah. They're funny. They're crazy. Yeah.
Not angry.
Kind of not like me, but I like them. Yeah. They're very cool. All right, I'll color that in a minute. So let's go back to this one. So this one, if you remember, we did paste. We covered it with embossing powder while the paste was wet. And the paste, probably dry, close enough. Maybe not completely dry. It might give us some bubbles, but I like that. But now we can just emboss this. And what I like about this technique is now I'm able to have metallic paste just using my embossing powders, or rust if I wanted to use, distress embossing powder, and I put it over my texture paste, I would have rust design, a texture. And this, we're going to heat this up, and you're going to see it becomes very, very metallic. But metallic texture, or rust, or platinum, or glitter, or anything. But now, because it's on that layer of paste, it's also a texture. So it's not just an embossed flourish. Because remember, if we just wanted to emboss the flourish, we could have just used ink through a stencil. But instead we have paste. Great texture. Yeah, so there's our metallic paste. And the great thing about something like this is now this is covered. So if I wanted to spray ink over it, or use my blending tool or whatever, it's not going to affect it. But this has a texture to it because now we have embossing powder on there. So it's got plastic in there.
Oh.
So it's beautiful. And you can use this kind of technique on anything. You can put it on a, you know, a journal cover or a wooden frame or a glass votive or anything. Yeah. Yeah. As long as you can heat it, you'll be fine. So as long as you can use a heat tool on it, it'll work great. And it's neat. It's really cool that we can just take regular paste and add something to it. You know, you wanted to, again, you were talking about doing things for weddings and that sort of thing. I use this paste all the time and cover it with glitter. So I put the paste in a stencil, pour rock candy on it, let it dry, and now it's sparkly. Yeah, so at Christmas when I was doing holiday projects, I always use that speckle stencil for snow.
It's snowy background.
Yeah, it's great. This one's really destroyed because I use it for other things. This one's very black, but normally I would just go in, white paste through that, lift it up, cover it with glitter, snow. Yeah, textured snow. This is good. I like this one a lot because obviously I like to use it with black. Because for people that want to kind of have a messy look, but they don't want to do anything messy with it, this is really nice because you can take something like that and you get to control the messiness. So some people are just really not good at that. This kind of lets you cheat.
Wel van een beetje messiness.
Ja, wij wel.
I'm meshing in my head.
Yeah, so it just allows you to create just some little splatters on there and completely control that. All right, let's stamp a bird. Let's use a little bit of distress markers. All right, so for the bird, this is probably the most popular set that we've released yet. I don't know why. I know. They're just funny. I don't know. I saw them.
They make you laugh.
They do. They make you laugh. So we'll take a stamp, Bird Crazy. We'll stamp with Archival ink. Now I'm choosing Archival because I'm going to watercolor this. I want to make sure that the ink I use is waterproof. So whatever ink you stamp with is fine. Now this is distressed watercolor cardstock. There's a textured side and a smooth side to this. So you can stamp on either side. If you stamp on the textured side, which I will, I'm going to stamp on that. I'm going to press down. I'm going to give this really good pressure, but I'm going to hold it in place for a minute. By holding it in place, it's giving the ink a chance to soak into the paper, and then you get a much better image on a bumpy surface instead of where it skips out. Then we'll go in and color. Now I can color with really anything I want, but I'm going to use the markers. So distress markers, what's nice about this is a water-based marker that's designed to blend with water. Let me clean my stamp. Put it back. They're just funny. All right, before I go in and color, let me just talk about some surfaces, because I think I have some samples. All right, so this is distressed watercolor cardstock. This is mixed media cardstock. So this is a new paper for Ranger. This is the paper that is in the Dilutions journals. For those that have worked with Diane's journals, that paper that's in there that's really great with water and ink, that's what this is now. This is specialty stamping. It's a coated paper, a matte coat, and of course that's glossy paper. So gloss on one side, matte on the other. And I like to show this demo because I like to explain to people that your ink is going to work different on your surfaces. So a distress marker is a dual tip marker. You've got one side that's going to be a brush nib, and that brush nib is going to be very flexible, pliable. It's designed to bend, okay? So it's designed to take that pressure and curve when you put it onto a surface. The other side is a fine tip, and that fine tip is really for journaling, going around a stencil, detail work, because that nib will never fray. It's plastic, so it will always stay that sharp. You can use these not only for coloring, but you can use them, like you mentioned, on a stamp. So you could take a rubber stamp and we can color the stamp with the marker, Breathe or Watercolor or whatever. Now, if you use your markers a lot like that, and you know, I tend to, well, this one's not bad because I've already flipped it. Sometimes I destroy the nib of the marker, right? Because if you do a lot of coloring like that or a lot of time on the stamp, you could damage the nib. But don't worry, because all of your markers have dual nibs. So I can grab this, twist the marker out, and there's a brand new nib on the other side. So all of your markers have 2 brush nibs. So if something happens to one side, just pull that out, flip it over, and press it back in, and now you have a brand new nib for that marker. Okay? So don't worry. Your markers will last. They're not refillable, so you'll have to really use it up before you need another one. So when I'm coloring a surface though, the paper that you're coloring on is, I think, what's going to make these markers either work or not work. And that's what people don't really understand. This is watercolor, mixed media, specialty, glossy. Okay? When I go to blend this, I'm going to work with a Waterbrush. A Waterbrush is a refillable brush. This is from Reinkers. You fill it with water. When you screw this together, the bristles, every time they bend, they will dispense water, right? So you don't have to, you only have to squeeze it when you first fill it, but once you do that, every time the bristles bend, you'll have water on it. And that makes it really nice. But that water, the detailer, has much shorter bristles, so I can just use the very tip of this. Now watercolor paper, that's going to give up the color. It's designed to do that. Yeah. And when you work on watercolor paper, another thing that it does is it takes the color and it pushes it out to the side. So when it dries, you're going to see a really nice outline of color. The mixed media cardstock, it also gives up color. It's designed to play, but it works a little bit different. You can see that the ink kind of stays where it is, whereas the watercolor paper is trying to flood it out. If you work on specialty stamping paper, it gives up some of the color, but the problem with this paper, because it has a coating for watercolor, it dries with almost like a chalky finish because the coating comes to the top. Glossy cardstock is the most permanent of all the papers. And it's confusing because most people think that would be the paper where the ink would just wipe away. No. So when you're trying to watercolor, you need to make sure that you're working on a surface that wants to let the color go. Otherwise, you could, you know, if you stamp on white paper and you sit there and you try to color and you're like, these markers are not working, they're supposed to be watercolor. Well, the markers work fine, but the paper's not letting it go. Yeah. So that's probably the most important thing that I try to educate people on, because all the time I get emails saying, I bought the markers and I'm not watercoloring, and I'm like, you know, they're using white, or, you know, they're even using the paper that you would use for a Copic. Totally different paper, right? Just like Copics have a special paper that they work better on, it's the same for something that's water-based. So that's why I like to work on watercolor paper. And you can just see even how these dry. Yeah. This gives me all that kind of great wicking and depth. This one is cool, but it's just flat. This, you can see what I mean, very chalky. Yeah. So my color almost disappears under the surface, and that just didn't do anything. That's just kind of, that's good for alcohol ink. Yeah. Yeah, that's really it. If you want to do a background, I'm just going to go in with my bird, and we'll start coloring him. It's kind of a funny bird.
Didn't you name them?
I didn't. I named this morning. This is Jane. Jane Alice, who worked for PI. Yeah, she works for Notions. She looks like Jane. If you know Jane. Short. Short. It's Jane. Here I'm just going to go in.
I'm a Jane.
And what's nice about this is that I can take the art, or basically the outline of that, and that's where I want to start with my color. And then I can take my water brush and I can just start pulling my color away from the edges, right? Because the paper, that's what's going to let that go. And it's okay to color outside the lines, don't be afraid. Push yourself to do that sometimes. All right. So once you have color down, it's good to not go back with a marker. If you go back with a marker, the felt on the wet paper will start to pull apart the paper, even on watercolor paper. So you have the option of either drying it quickly, then you can go back with a marker, or just make a palette. And the palette could be the markers, it could be your ink pad, it could be whatever. But now I can pick up my color and I can introduce it into my watercolor, okay? By doing it this way, you get a much better blend of color, because it's going to just work and float into that paper. So any place that you want to add color, and you just you really want to be kind of bouncy. I always tell people, like, just kind of bounce around. Don't be so serious when you're coloring. The more playful you are with the brush, the more playful your inks are going to be on the surface. Adding color, because I know that that area is dry, I can still go in and add that. I can take a little color, I can pick up some color on my water brush and just blend in those colors. And when I clean the water brush, I'm either cleaning it on my craft sheet or I clean it on my hand. The reason I do that is I want my bristles to stay wet. Right? If you clean it off onto a paper towel, your bristles are dry. And then you go to try to blend and it's not a water brush, it's a dry brush. So it doesn't do you any good. Next I'm going to take pumice stone. Pumice stone is a really good color for shadow. So I can pick up some of that color, I can just create a shadow.
Jane toch een beetje somber kijkt, hè?
Ze wil wel lachen, maar ze doet het niet.
Blue Monday, Jane.
Ja.
And then you just dry it. Now, one thing that's also really cool to know when you're working on this kind of paper is that as much as we can add color, you can also remove color. So let's say you did this watercolor and you say, oh, you know what, I really like this, but I just wish my bird was a little bit lighter. So I can just go in with water and I can touch an area that I want to lighten and just really flood that with water, find a clean area with your cloth. Yeah. And you can lift color right out. So you can take color, put it back, right? And then we'll just do a quick background. So my background, let's see what I want to use. Let's use a little bit of tumbled glass. This time I'm going to take a flat water brush. That's good. Flat water brush is nice because it's flat, right? And because it's flat, it's just going to allow me to go in and just pick up my color and just apply it to my background. Okay, makes for an easy sky. Ooh, we'll take a little bit of that, whatever that is. See, it makes you look like you know what you're doing, but it's not. It's the ink. The ink that does it.
It looks like they know what you're doing.
That's right, I don't. Just play. Okay. But what I like to do with this, and this one, I mean, you're going to put it on a card, you could take that, you could tear the edge, you could ink it, you could go in with a spritzer, because that's even fun to do. Take a marker spritzer, take your light color like that, and you can just add, you know, some playful little splatters on that or something like that. Yeah, I mean, that's a simple thing to do. But if you wanted to create a background, another thing I like to show with the water brush, because I do a lot of stuff in different canvas journals, planners, anything where sometimes I want to be very playful with the ink. A cool feature about this is that I can use my ink pads, I can use my acrylic paints, I can use my markers, I can use stain. If I want to take a color of stain, I can take any medium that I want to use. I'll even use some yellow here just to show you. There we go. And there's times that I want to create a full background of color. So what's great about this is obviously if I use the brush like I did on the background, you can really control the flow of that because it's flat. This has a removable ferrule, so if I snap this off, it now becomes a large round. And so now I have the ability to go in and pick up my color, and I can move my color all the way around my paper. And really create some super simple backgrounds. I can use acrylic paint, I can use watercolor, I can use whatever I want with the brush. Because there's no way to damage this brush.
There is.
Well, to heat it.
Give it to a dog.
The dog.
Oh yeah.
That's anything.
That's anything. And then I'm just going to take the brush, take that, snap it right back on, and now you're back to a flat brush.
Smart.
Yeah, so it's just a great way that we can create a background. I'll spray with a little bit of water as it's drying. So that just creates that cool. So it just looks like, oh, look at that. You say, oh, it took me hours to do. Man, I'm doing this background. It's hours of layering, and then I put salt on it. And, you know.
Hard days work.
Yeah. But that's a really simple background that you could die cut, you can use paper punches, you can do anything.
Snowflake crystal.
Yes. Yeah, that's what water will do. And it's also, of course, because of the paper. You know, that paper, like I said, when it takes the ink, what does it want to do with the ink? It wants to push it from the sides. So when you add water to it, it makes it even more reactive than even a manila tag. So.
Can you work on any watercolor paper?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you like to work with a hot press or cold press paper, something that has texture, you work on anything. And it's nice because all of your products are going to do basically, I mean, you look here, this is all, we've all worked with distress, but everything that you have is totally different look, finished look, and it really has to do with how you, oh, that's nice.
Jane,
it's bonus.
what did you do?
Jane, yeah. What's going on, Jane? That's funny.
She wants to laugh.
See?
Almost.
Funny. Yeah, she wants to laugh. She could be, yeah, she could be happy, sad, confused, anything. In love, dreaming.
I see a wedding card for Tim.
Oh, this one?
Yeah, and you can put like a...
Put like a little bow tie here?
Yeah, and my brother got married last summer and I had to make 20 wedding cards for one wedding.
Yep.
And of course they all had to be different.
Yes, of course.
Oh, it was a nightmare.
I think this is gonna, I can't wait to see what people do with this set. I really can't. Because it's so not my style, but it is.
They're kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. It is. I think that's the most exciting thing, and that was really my motivation behind this particular release of stamps. Was, you know, the blueprint sets. Those were very popular because people like to color those, but that's all we had to color. And people still love those. They're just like, they are fans of blueprint stamps. But you know, I got a lot of emails from people saying I just didn't have a lot of images that you could color in, because most of my images, the way I use a stamp is I use a stamp to go over a background. So I'm not ever, so my images are always, you know, they're solid. They're just, they're designed. And they said, you need to do more things that you can color. And I thought, So, but I'm not like that. I'm ephemera based. So I went out and I looked for different artists that had drawings. So I had, you know, people that did botanical drawings, and I had birds, and I had the fashion set. And so there's a lot of different kind of art this release, but I like it because it's different. People are like, it's something, you know, something new to use.